Is there ever such a thing as too much staging? Do collisions happen on real model railroads? Oops. What happens when you stop paying attention? These are all subjects of today's video, and this is Burr Stewart, your host, and welcome to part 46 of my continuing series of model railroad operations videos. As you can see from these various vignettes, the last time we had people over, we got a lot accomplished. And the main thing I want to show you is this installation of the new staging yard underneath the main yard of Inner Bay on my Burlington Northern model railroad, which is set in 1973. You can see here a bunch of guys standing around waiting for us to figure out how to install this 3-track staging yard in the space behind the diagonal struts that support the Inner Bay yard. I'm speeding up the video so we don't have to watch the entire thing. It was clear that I had to remove that airplane. Then we snaked the staging yard over. Easy does it.
How are we doing? How are we doing?
And held it in place using a little template to make sure we had it at the right height. And then we took some screws and sheetrock screws, the 3-inch sheetrock screws, and we screwed the staging yard right into the studs, which are 2x2 vertical studs on the walls. Mission accomplished. Looks nice and sturdy, and now we just need to install the next one. Here's a still photo of everyone working on it, and this is what it looks like installed in place. The ladder which feeds these 3 tracks is something that we'll be finishing and installing soon to the right of this action. Now the next speeded up video here shows the second section, which is just like the first, being put into place. These sections are about 6 feet long, and they will allow us to park both the UP and the Milwaukee transfer trains off the layout when we're not running those particular transfer operations. As you can see, the installation of the second shelf was just like the first. The only thing left to do was to install the rail joiners in between the 2 sections to make sure that the rails stayed at the same height. This was a little awkward to do, but it was a lot easier than laying the track, which of course I had already done before we installed the sections. We got up there with a flashlight and a pair of pliers, and I painstakingly installed those, slid the rail joiners to connect the 2 rails. Wasn't my favorite job, but we got it done eventually. The next thing we did, which was a little more fun, was to put some locomotives and rolling stock up on the shelf and just take a look at what it looked like and make sure we were comfortable with what we were going to do. Obviously, we could have removed the shelf if we didn't like it, but after taking a look at it, I think we decided that this was a great plan. So, very satisfied with ourselves for accomplishing some construction, we went back to playing with trains. Here, as you saw before, one of our operators thought that he had a clear shot to go back into the yard while this train was in parallel, but of course that turned out not to be true. Bang! We didn't call the wrecker crew, we just used the old 050 to remove the locomotive and re-rail the other engines and get back to work. This train was a northbound mixed freight that was just pulling into Bayside Yard in Everett on its way from Seattle up to Vancouver, British Columbia. I'll speed the video up a little bit so that you can enjoy the consist of this train, but not at this slow speed that we actually ran it. Having recovered from the humiliation of the previous accident, the switcher did come in and work this train from the rear, at least briefly. A few minutes later, the train had arrived up in the Burlington yard, which is halfway between Everett and Bellingham, for those of you that are looking at a map, and came in and did a little bit more switching, dropping off cars that were destined for the Burlington area and picking up cars that needed to head north to Bellingham and Vancouver, British Columbia. The Burlington Yard, as you know from some of my other videos, is a very interesting place to model and to operate because it includes both a branch line to the west, which is called the Anacortes branch, and serves mainly a refinery and the port of Anacortes. Actually, I think it's two refineries. So you can see the string of tank cars on the right-hand side of this shot that are all going to those two refineries in Anacortes. And then on the left, a little bit off the picture here, is the concrete branch, which heads up into the mountains towards the east of Burlington. And it includes logging and a famous concrete plant, which is why the town was called Concrete and it was called the Concrete Branch. Finally, in the very far distance of the picture, where those trees are on a hill there, is the Mount Vernon area, which is a small town near the Burlington Yard, where there were a number of shippers. So we basically have three different branch line operations, which are all based out of this Burlington Yard. And it's a lot of fun to operate. It has 5 tracks altogether and a number of industries and locals to handle. When I got this shelf built, I really had the impression that it would make a perfectly good model railroad all by itself. And in fact, there's a model railroader right now living in Mount Vernon who is doing exactly that, building an entire layout just based on the Burlington Yard and the Anacortes and concrete branches. Well, I've talked long enough. As you can see, we're doing a lot of flat switching here in the Burlington Yard, so let's speed it up for a minute. Well, we dropped off 2 cars there on track 2. On the Burlington Northern, the convention was that the main line was the main line, and then the siding was track 1, and then the tracks were numbered sequentially after that. Finally, near the Stacy Street Yard and the Waterfront Yard in downtown Seattle, one of our operators was finally getting to have the chance to unload the Milwaukee car barge, which served Port Angeles and Port Townsend in 1973, before it came the Seattle and North Coast Railroad and was eventually abandoned. Here you can see the last set of cars from the center track being pulled out. I promise that someday we'll do a video just about the Milwaukee car barge operation, but for now, you'll just have to accept that this happens, and even derailments happen. It's not easy to interface between a car barge and a model railroad layout without an occasional glitch. It's reality model railroading, right? And last but not least, you waited all this time for it. I heard a strange noise and saw that one of the steam engines on the narrow gauge line had driven itself into the turntable. So I went to a throttle and shut it down, which you'll see in a minute. But here we see the northbound mixed freight train, which you saw earlier in this video, heading along the shores of Puget Sound. I love this view and the recent scenic additions that Dave made to it. So I thought we should at least watch this train for a minute, and then I'll go back and fix the steam engine.
Not drop cars, set out cars and what tracks stuff in there. Don't stop this yet. I'll tell you when to stop.
All right, we got to the caboose. Now let's go back and fix that steam engine. It's sawing away down there in the turntable pit. I grabbed a throttle and I selected the locomotive number. And as soon as I selected that locomotive number, of course, that brought the chugging to a stop, because whenever you select it with a new throttle, it gives it a 0 throttle command. And that solved that problem. And that's all I have for today as we watch this train march off into the sunset. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a little bit eclectic today, but we'll get back to better operations soon after we do a little more construction work. But in the meantime, this is Burr Stewart wishing you much fun with trains.